Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking part in this fiscal year 2019 training on state purchasing procedures and the State Purchasing Card Program. I am Courtney Sisk-Johnson with the Purchasing Division, and I'm pleased to welcome all West Virginia state officials who are required to take this annual training. I know that all of you have very busy schedules, so I appreciate you taking 2 hours of your day today to participate in this session. West Virginia Code 5A-3-60 requires certain state officials to take 2 hours of training annually on purchasing procedures and purchasing card use. Those required to take this training include all executive department cabinet secretaries and their deputies, commissioners and their deputies and assistant commissioners, directors and their deputies and assistant directors, and department heads and their deputies and department assistants. This training is offered twice per fiscal year as a webinar via WebEx. These sessions are also recorded and made available online on the State Auditor's Office and Purchasing Division's websites. The online recording will suffice to meet this requirement for any individual who is unable to participate in one of the 2 scheduled live webinars. For those individuals who choose to view the online recording, they must send us their certificate of completion to ensure that they receive credit for viewing the training. Today's session will last until approximately 11 o'clock. I will begin with information on the state purchasing procedures, and I will be followed by Travis Mullinax from the State Auditor's Office. The Purchasing Division has a staff of approximately 55 full-time employees at the Capitol Complex in Building 15 and at the Surplus Property location in Dunbar. The Purchasing Division staff provides a service function to your agencies. We are responsible for the procurement of commodities and services that your organization needs to operate your programs and services. These are the people who help make that happen. As mentioned, today's webinar will be recorded and posted on the Purchasing Division's website and also on the State Auditor's Office website within the next couple of weeks. This live webinar and its recording have been approved for 2.4 hours of in-house online CLE credit from the West Virginia State Bar. If you are interested in obtaining CLE credits for today's live webinar, please email your name and bar ID number to Samantha Knapp at the email address located on this screen. Any individual who chooses to view this recording later on must self-report their participation in this training to the State Bar to obtain those CLE credits. Should you have any questions throughout today's presentation, you may type them into the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll take a few minutes at the end of today's presentation to answer these questions. Those of you on today's webinar represent the top level of management within state government. You are all responsible for leading and managing the delivery of services required of your agencies to the citizens of West Virginia. For your agencies to be successful in delivering these mandated services to our citizens, you need many different types of commodities and services to function. It's the Purchasing Division's responsibility to obtain on your behalf the commodities and services needed to allow you to fulfill your mission. We depend on and work closely with your procurement staff to fulfill those needs. On this slide, you can see the Purchasing Division's mission, and that is to provide prudent and fair spending practices in procuring quality goods and services at the lowest cost to state taxpayers by maximizing efficiencies and offering guidance to our customers. During today's webinar, we hope that you will obtain a general understanding of who we are, but also what we do and how we do it. We will also be addressing some of the recent changes that went into effect that impact the purchasing process. Before we talk about the process of procurement, I want to review the organizational structure of the Purchasing Division. As you can see on the screen, Mike Sheets serves as the director of the Purchasing Division. The division is then made up of 3 sections in addition to our legal counsel. They include the Acquisitions and Contract Administration section, the Communication and Technical Services section, and Program Services. The following staff members oversee these various sections. Assistant Director Frank Whitaker oversees the Acquisitions and Contract Administration section. Assistant Director Elizabeth Perdue oversees Program Services. and Samantha Knapp currently serves as the Acting Assistant Director for the Communication and Technical Services section. Additionally, Jimmy Meadows serves as the Purchasing Division's General Counsel. And now I'll highlight the responsibilities of each section. The Acquisitions and Contract Administration section is responsible for processing purchases expected to exceed $25,000 on behalf of state agencies which fall under our authority. This section also maintains the contract management and agency inspection services programs. We have a staff of 10 buyers and supervisors who are responsible for obtaining the commodities and services on behalf of state agencies. Our buyers are assigned by agency rather than commodity. They serve as the subject matter experts on the process of state procurement rather than on the specific commodities and services that they buy. The reason we're organized this way is because we believe our expertise should be in our core mission, which is purchasing, and that the staff within your agencies have the specific technical expertise in most cases of the commodities and services that you need. Of the 10 buyers, we have designated Senior Buyer Mark Atkins as the statewide contracts buyer to manage the nearly 60 contracts that are mandatory for use by all state agencies falling under our authority. To assist your agencies in developing specifications, the Purchasing Division maintains specification templates for elevator and HVAC maintenance, tractors, and security systems, which are to be used as a starting point for agencies for these items. The specification templates are posted on our website and can be used and modified by the agency as needed. A link to those templates will be posted at the end of this presentation. Looking back at our structure, having our buyers assigned to specific agencies means that each of your agencies has a sole point of contact in the Purchasing Division, which allows the Purchasing Division to provide better customer service to your agencies. The assigned buyer for your agency works together with your agency-designated procurement officer to buy the commodities and services required by your agencies. We feel these relationships are critical in ensuring success during the procurement process. The next section of the Purchasing Division is the Communication and Technical Services section. This section is responsible for technology, communication, professional development and training, and related administrative functions, including vendor registration, imaging and record retention, bid receipt, and purchase order encumbrance. This training today is prepared and coordinated through this section. The final section is Program Services. This section is responsible for several programs administered by the division, including the Surplus Property Program, which manages the state and federal programs for property no longer needed within the respective governments, the Travel Management Office, which offers guidance to state business travelers and oversees statewide contracts for travel-related services, and the Fixed Assets Unit, which maintains the state's inventory of personal property. As mentioned previously, we also have a general counsel who manages all of our legal affairs, including contract terms and conditions, disputes and resolutions, drafting legislation, and other relevant legal and administrative issues. Most state governments throughout the nation have a centralized procurement function like West Virginia. However, the administration and rules vary with each state. West Virginia Code centralizes the procurement function of state government within the Purchasing Division in the same way that other functions are centralized for most agencies, including personnel, technology, finance, and retirement. Some of the benefits of a centralized procurement function include having the consistency of laws, rules, and procedures, gaining economies of scale, providing system transparency, and having a central point of contact for process-related questions. The Purchasing Division manages procurement transactions for agencies under its authority, including but not limited to those for commodities, services, and technology. State agencies have been delegated the authority to make purchases up to $25,000, with the Purchasing Division processing all transactions expected to exceed that dollar threshold. The Purchasing Division has awarded statewide contracts for commonly used commodities and services, including office supplies, technology equipment and services, and vehicles. We bid and award statewide contracts for these common commodities and services on behalf of all state agencies to take advantage of the economies of scale and to make the ordering process more efficient. A list of all statewide contracts can be found on the Purchasing Division's website. We also buy a wide range of agency-specific commodities and services, from food to medical supplies and everything in between. We participate in cooperative contracts that have been bid and awarded by other public entities around the country to gain economies of scale and shorten the procurement process. These contracts may be used by our agencies upon approval. All of our procedures are based on laws and rules established in West Virginia Code and the West Virginia Code of State Rules. Our primary code citation is 5A-3, and our rules can be found as Title 148, Series 1 of the Code of State Rules. As noted on this slide, there are also specific code citations for architectural and engineering services, construction, and our two set-aside programs, correctional industries, and the state use program. As is the case with many other state functions, there are some exceptions to this centralized procurement system. The legislature has statutorily granted various state agencies the ability to perform some or all of those agencies' needed procurement function outside of the centralized procurement mandate. At this time, the Purchasing Division is aware of 46 full or partial statutory exemptions. Full exemptions include entities such as the legislative and judicial branches of government, higher education, agencies including the Division of Corrections and Juvenile Services and State Police, and DHHR for facilities providing direct patient care, while partial exemptions have been granted for the Division of Highways for road construction, PEIA contracts for insurance coverage, and equipment for the Division of Protective Services as necessary to maintain security at the Capitol Complex, among others. The Purchasing Division has compiled an unofficial list of these statutory exemptions, which can be found on the Purchasing Division's website. Title 148 of the Code of State Rules stipulates that all purchases be approved by the Secretary or head of a spending unit or designee whose name must be filed with the Purchasing Division. The person designated is responsible for the agency's procurement function at the agency delegated level and works directly with the Purchasing Division to process formal acquisitions expected to exceed $25,000. They should be involved at all levels of any future purchases your agency plans to make. Their understanding and knowledge of the state purchasing process can ensure that your agency remains in compliance with state law. It is essential that the designated procurement officers are trained on the Purchasing Division's procedures. In addition to being responsible for any internal training conducted at the agency level, the designee is required by the West Virginia Code of State Rules to take 10 hours annually of training offered by the Purchasing Division, which is tracked on a fiscal year basis. The designated procurement officers for each state spending unit under our authority are listed on our website. The list is updated each fiscal year and as changes occur throughout the year. The link to this listing will be included at the end of our presentation today. The Purchasing Division prides itself on having a comprehensive training program to educate our agency purchasers on the laws and rules which govern the state purchasing process and to assist them in obtaining the 10 hours of required training annually. Trainings are offered through a variety of platforms, including in-person, online via webinars, and on-demand training modules, and through an annual conference. Our 2019 Agency Purchasing Conference is scheduled for September 17th through the 20th at Lakeview Resort in Morgantown and provides ample training and networking opportunities. Most of our agency-designated procurement officers are able to receive their 10 hours of required training during that week. We also maintain a state certification program which has been recognized by the Division of Personnel as part of its pay plan policy. That program incorporates public procurement experience, training offered by the Purchasing Division, a hands-on component, and a final examination. More information on our training program can be found on our website, wvpurchasing.gov, by clicking on the training link on the left-hand side of the page. During fiscal year 2018, the Purchasing Division reported that more than 22,000 new award transactions and delivery orders were processed, exceeding $489 million. This number includes all delivery orders processed against central master agreements at both the agency level, which are called agency delivery orders, and through the Purchasing Division, which are called central delivery orders. A central master agreement, which is processed by the Purchasing Division, covers a specified period in which all terms, conditions, and prices are stated, but quantity is not. Delivery orders may be made from these contracts for specific quantities. Nearly 54% of the contracts and delivery orders for fiscal year 2018 were awarded to West Virginia companies. In addition to new purchase and delivery orders, we also processed nearly 1,800 change orders to existing contracts. These numbers show the significance of what we do. It is because this money comes from our taxpayer dollars that we have a duty to ensure that it is being spent efficiently and ethically. For this reason, we have developed a decision path to assist our agency purchasers from the time the agency determines a need to the award of a purchase order or contract. For additional statistical data for fiscal year 2018, you can view our annual report on our website at wvpurchasing.gov. This slide highlights the first few steps in the purchasing decision path. Step 1 requires the agency to first determine its need. In other words, what is the product or service required by the agency, what quality and quantity is needed, what is the estimated cost, and are there any special delivery requirements? Once your agency has determined that information, you can move on to step 2 of the process, which is seeking availability of the commodity or service through internal sources. There are 3 internal sources, including correctional industries, the State Use Program, also known as sheltered workshops, and the West Virginia State Agency for Surplus Property. Correctional industries and sheltered workshops are mandatory for use. That means if the product or service is available through either of these entities, it must be acquired in this manner. If the product or service is available but not in the required time, quality, quantity, or other factors, then a written waiver must be issued from correctional industries or sheltered workshops in accordance with state purchasing guidelines. Surplus property is optional but strongly encouraged for use for state agencies when needing furniture, vehicles, equipment, and many other commodities. A waiver from surplus property is not required, but keep in mind that it is another source that may save your agency money. They also manage the federal surplus property program, which we will talk about a little bit later in this presentation. If the product or service is not available from any of the internal sources, step 3 requires the agency to determine if the product or service is available from an existing statewide or agency contract. If it is available from either of these types of contracts, the agency must purchase the product or service from that statewide or agency contract. Although we don't have it mentioned on this slide, if the commodity or service is not available from a statewide or agency contract, the next step requires the agency to determine if the purchase is considered an emergency purchase or a direct award procurement. I'll go into more detail about these purchase types later, but for your reference, more information on these types of purchases can be found in the Purchasing Division Procedures Handbook. If you've gone through the first few steps of the process and can't find the commodity or service on any of these mandatory contracts, and you have determined this will not be an emergency or direct award purchase, at this point, you would be looking at the competitive bidding process. There are several types of competitive solicitations used by the Purchasing Division. I'll get into those in a minute, but first, please note that agencies are delegated the authority to purchase commodities and services up to $25,000, and there are some spending thresholds within that amount they should be aware of. The thresholds within agency delegated authority are outlined on this slide. Agencies cannot exceed a spending threshold without the proper level of documentation and bidding. Commodities and services that are expected to cost $2,500 or less require no bids, although competition is always encouraged. Purchases of $2,500.01 to $10,000 require 3 verbal bids, and the lowest bid meeting specifications must be awarded the purchase order or contract. Purchases of $10,001 to $25,000 require 3 written bids, and the lowest bid meeting specifications must be awarded the purchase order or contract. Any purchase expected to exceed $25,000 is considered a formal purchase and must be processed through the Purchasing Division. In short, the agency would process the competitive solicitation at the agency level following its agency delegated procedures if it's expected to cost $25,000 or less, or at the formal level if it is expected to exceed $25,000. All vendors conducting business with the state of West Virginia are required to register with the Purchasing Division in accordance with West Virginia Code 5A-3-12. There is an exception to this registration requirement, which includes purchasing card vendors providing travel-related services or receiving an aggregate total yearly payment of less than $25,000 from a state spending unit. Although vendors do not have to be an approved paid vendor to submit a bid, they may be required to create a user account in WV Oasis if they wish to submit their bid electronically. This account is not the same as registering with the Purchasing Division's vendor registration program, which would be required if the vendor receives a purchase order or contract. Vendors are encouraged to register through the Vendor Self-Service Portal as part of WV Oasis, but may also still complete a paper form through our registration office. Vendors receiving orders for goods or services exceeding $2,500, regardless of payment method, must pay an annual fee of $125. There are a couple of exceptions as to who must pay the fee. These include purchasing card vendors providing travel-related services or receiving an aggregate total yearly payment of less than $25,000 from a spending unit, as well as direct award vendors and those vendors who are providing goods and services that have been declared as non-competitive, exempted products or services listed in Section 9 of our Purchasing Division Procedures Handbook. Vendors must also be in good standing with other state and local agencies, such as the Secretary of State's Office, Workers' Compensation, and the Tax Department to be able to receive a purchase order or contract. Anytime your agency determines that it will need to competitively solicit goods or services, you should immediately begin to think about the specifications, which will be the basis for everything you'll do moving forward. A specification is a concise statement explaining the type of good or service that is needed, the quality level, and special requirements in the design, performance, delivery, and usage. There are 4 different types of specifications, which include brand name or equal, performance, and design specifications, and when approved through the proper channels, there are also standardization specifications. In short, the brand name or equal type requires the words or equal to follow the brand name to inform vendors that alternate bids will be considered. Following the 2018 legislative session, agencies may now create a standard, eliminating the need for the or equal language in some instances. That is known as the standardization specification. The performance specification focuses more on how well an item operates and includes total ownership cost for operating and maintaining the product. The design specification concentrates on the dimensional and other physical requirements of the item being purchased and is used when a commodity has to be specially made to meet the agency's unique needs. Specifications are incorporated into the requisition that the agency submits to the Purchasing Division for formal purchases and into the solicitation advertised by agencies for agency-delegated purchases. Not only do specifications tell the vendor exactly what your agency needs, they often serve as your defense if a vendor protests a contract award. We'll discuss protests a little later on. The Purchasing Division strongly believes in the importance of specifications. Last year, we announced the first ever recipient for the Purchasing Division's Excellence in Specification Writing Award, which looks at the scope, pricing, administrative, time and appearance, readability of the specification. The Department of Transportation's Division of Highways was selected for this award for specifications that were written for its single-axle dump truck with hydraulic system, snowplow, and V-box spreader. Now that we've addressed the importance of specifications, let's review some of the competitive solicitation types used by the Purchasing Division. The most commonly used method of procurement is the Request for Quotations method, or RFQ. This type of purchase is used to acquire all tangible property, such as equipment and supplies. The basis for award with this method is straightforward. The award is made to the lowest responsible bidder who meets all mandatory specifications. The next type is a Request for Proposals method, referred to as an RFP, and is typically used for services. This type is a best value procurement method and is limited to procurements with an estimated value of $100,000 or more. The agency must obtain approval from the purchasing director to use this method. They must submit their justification for using this process in writing, whether or not the solicitation will ultimately replace a current purchase order or contract, and identify what that contract is if it does. The RFP is received in two distinct parts, the technical proposal and the cost proposal. The evaluation is based on a 100-point total score, with cost representing a minimum of 30 of the 100 points possible. The technical proposal is opened first, and the RFP Evaluation Committee reviews and evaluates those, sending their written consensus to the Purchasing Division buyer. Vendors must score a minimum of 70% of the 70 points possible to be considered. This is known as the minimum acceptable score. Vendors who do not obtain the minimum accepted score, which is 49 points in most cases, are disqualified and removed from further consideration. The cost proposals are then opened. The Evaluation Committee will review the cost proposals, assign appropriate points, and make a final consensus recommendation to the Purchasing Division buyer. The award is based on the highest score, which is a combination of the technical proposals and the cost proposals. A second best value procurement method that we utilize is the expression of interest, or EOI. This type is utilized in the procurement of architectural and engineering services for projects estimated to exceed $250,000. The EOI includes a statement of qualifications and performance data and may include a vendor's anticipated concepts and proposed methods of approach to a project. The committee will evaluate the information submitted with the proposal and then develop a short list of 3 firms they believe are best qualified to perform the desired service. They will then meet with each firm on the short list to conduct an interview to discuss their anticipated concepts and proposed methods. The committee will rank the firms deemed to be the most highly qualified based on the information discussed during their interview and submit that list to the Purchasing Division. At that time, the agency will enter into negotiations with the most qualified firm as to the scope of service and price. If the agency fails to negotiate a satisfactory contract with the most qualified firm, they will then move on to the next firm. If negotiations fail with all firms, they will rebid the solicitation. The Purchasing Division uses WV Oasis and its vendor self-service vendor portal. WB Oasis allows us to advertise all solicitations expected to exceed $10,000, with vendors having access to that information in real time. The advertising mechanism in WB Oasis is called the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin. Using the vendor self-service portal, vendors can search for current solicitations using keywords. They can view solicitations processed at the agency delegated level, as well as those that are processed at the formal level. Within WB Oasis, solicitations are assigned an A or a C in front of the document name. Those with an A are processed at the agency level, and those with a C, which stands for centralized, are processed by the purchasing division. As previously mentioned, a vendor does not have to be registered to submit a bid, but will need to create an account if that bid is submitted electronically. One of the benefits of creating an account is that a vendor can assign itself commodity codes, which means that they would be notified anytime a solicitation is publicized using those commodity codes. This makes it much easier for the vendor to stay informed of ongoing solicitations that may be pertinent to them. The Purchasing Division requests the assistance of the state agency in evaluating the bids for its solicitations, since they wrote the specifications and have a full understanding of what they need. After they review the bids, the agencies then submit a recommendation for award to the Purchasing Division. For formal acquisitions, which are those exceeding $25,000, the Purchasing Division is the only entity that can issue or change those contracts, and all questions regarding those contracts should be directed to the Purchasing Division buyer who was responsible for processing that contract. After the evaluation process, the Purchasing Division will send the contract to the Attorney General's office for approval as to form. Upon approval, the contract is then encumbered by the Purchasing Division and sent to the vendor. Encumbrance ensures that the agency has the funds to make the specific purchase. No work can begin until the vendor has the encumbered purchase order or contract in hand, or until a notice to proceed is issued. It's important to note that from the time an agency submits a requisition to the Purchasing Division until an award is made, no communication may be made between the agency and any vendor regarding the solicitation out for bid to ensure fairness and transparency. This is considered the blackout period, and all communication with vendors relating to that solicitation during that time must be directed to the Purchasing Division buyer. The Code of State Rules gives vendors the opportunity to challenge the contract specifications written by the agency or to challenge the ultimate contract award. The protest of specifications allows the vendor to protest the specifications prior to the actual award being made and prior to bids being opened, and must be submitted no later than 5 working days prior to the bid opening. The protest of specifications is intended to guard against an agency that inadvertently, or maybe in some cases intentionally, drafted specifications that circumvent competitive bidding. This may be done by including specifications that are too restrictive that only a few vendors can meet them. On the flip side, specifications can be too vague, allowing vendors to provide a less than acceptable quality level commodity or service, or provide a product or service above and beyond what is needed, driving up the cost. The protest of award, on the other hand, is the most common type of protest received by the Purchasing Division. This type of protest must be submitted no later than 5 working days after the award is made, which is the day the contract is encumbered. There are several reasons a vendor may protest the contract of award. A vendor may protest if the winning vendor bid inferior commodities that are not equal or fail to meet a mandatory specification which was ultimately missed by the agency and or the Purchasing Division during the evaluation process. So we've talked about the various types of competitive procurements, but now I want to touch on some other types. The first is direct award procurements, which was a change made during the 2018 legislative session as part of Senate Bill 283, and for which rules were formally promulgated during this last legislative session. Direct award is when a commodity or service is believed to be available by one vendor or that no other vendor would be willing or able to provide the commodity or service without a detrimental effect to the agency. In all cases, the law requires that agencies document their attempts to secure competition. For purchases up to $25,000, the agency declares and processes its own direct award procurements and must provide written justification in the agency file. A direct award request for consideration, WV-65A form, must be completed and approved by the agency procurement officer. This will be important to remember for when our purchasing division inspectors visit your agency to inspect its purchases for compliance. For direct award procurements that are expected to exceed $25,000, the agency must complete and submit to the purchasing division a direct award request, WV-65 form, to determine the basis for the direct award procurement and the specific efforts made to determine the availability of other sources. For direct awards processed by the agency and those processed through the purchasing division, the intent to make the direct award procurement must be advertised to the vendor community for at least 10 business days. The purchasing division advertises the solicitation in the purchasing bulletin to allow vendors the opportunity to express interest in the direct award procurement. If a vendor expresses interest and provides proper documentation that they can, in fact, provide the commodity or service in question, then the purchasing division may reject the direct award and require the agency to competitively bid the commodity or service. If no vendors respond, however, the purchasing division may then proceed with a direct award purchase with the vendor. West Virginia Code also recognizes that purchases may be necessary when unforeseen causes arise, including delays by contractors, delays in transportation, an unanticipated volume of work, flooding to workplace buildings, power outages, or fires. 3 bids are required for emergency purchases if possible. Emergency purchases that are expected to exceed $25,000 must first be approved by the purchasing director. However, if the emergency occurs after business hours, on a weekend, or on a holiday, the agency may proceed with the emergency purchase but must follow up with the purchasing director on the first business day with their justification and all documentation. An emergency purchase is a short-term solution to fix a problem and may not be used as a permanent or long-term solution or to circumvent the normal competitive bidding process. Instead, an emergency purchase allows for an immediate solution to a problem until it can be properly bid. Keep in mind that emergency purchases are not used for hardship resulting from neglect, poor planning, or lack of organization by the spending unit. The purchasing division also maintains a non-competitive exempt list of commodities and services, which is updated each July. This list can be found as Section 9 of the Purchasing Division Procedures Handbook. West Virginia Code gives the purchasing director the authority to determine which commodities and services are not possible to obtain through the competitive bidding process. Purchasing division approval is not required for these procurements unless specifically noted. However, spending units purchasing from vendors under the exempt list must continue to follow the standard purchasing procedure associated with a normal purchase of the same dollar amount, including vendor registration, and must continue to submit contracts to the Attorney General's office for approval after form. Now let's discuss what to do in the event that you experience any issues with vendors. First and foremost, ensure that you understand the contract in its entirety and its requirements. Does the issue tie back to a specification that the vendor has failed to meet? Have you brought up the issue with the vendor? In some cases, they may not even know that there's an issue. Make sure to give them an opportunity to make things right. Be sure to document all efforts made to resolve the issue, including phone conversations, emails, and letters. And finally, if multiple attempts to resolve the issue have failed, you can complete the vendor performance WV-82 form and submitted to the Purchasing Division with all supporting documentation and correspondence. If one agency has an issue with a vendor, other agencies may as well. So having that documentation will assist the Purchasing Division in coming to a solution of how to proceed. Due to a collective effort to make the state procurement process more efficient and expedient, the Purchasing Division has worked closely with our agency purchasers, the administration, and legislators during the past few years to identify areas that would improve how we purchase commodities and services while maintaining the safeguards and integrity of the procurement process. Because of this continued effort, Senate Bill 283 passed and was signed into law as part of the 2018 legislative session. As a result of that bill, the Purchasing Division promulgated rules this past session, which went into effect on April 1st, 2019. I'll now highlight some of those rules. A new provision was added regarding contract cancellation. According to the new provision, if a vendor protests a contract award based on an error made and that error can be proven or confirmed, the contract may be canceled without notice and awarded to the next low bid. According to the previous rule, there had to be a pattern of unacceptable performance before action of suspension could be taken against a vendor. With the new rule, a single occurrence may now suffice for this type of action. Additionally, the rule makes it easier to debar a related party to a debarred vendor. Vendors that receive a direct award may have the registration fee waived if the purchasing director deems it appropriate. However, a fee waiver applies only on a transactional basis, so if that vendor also provides goods and/or services through the competitive bid process, then the registration fee would be required at that time. During the 2018 legislative session, vendor preference was changed significantly. A reciprocal preference was created that allowed West Virginia vendors to receive a preference on state solicitations when bidding against out-of-state vendors if those vendors are eligible to receive a preference in their home state. But this reciprocal preference added time to the procurement process because we have no process to check whether an out-of-state vendor qualified for preference in their own state. The new rule still requires vendors to make their request for preference, whether traditional or reciprocal, at the time they submit their bid. But now, with the request, the vendor must provide proof, such as a certificate of good standing from the tax division and their Secretary of State filings or affidavit. The required documentation is outlined in the rule. Sole source language was modified to direct award to provide consistency with the language in West Virginia Code. RFP scoring language was modified to allow for best-in-class comparison. Previously, when requesting to utilize a cooperative contract, the various requirements took agencies a lot of time and effort to research and document. The new rule significantly streamlines the cooperative contracting process by allowing agencies to document only that the cooperative contract is valid, was properly awarded, financially advantageous, and comparable to what they could obtain through competitive bidding. The new rule requires that all vendors be treated equally during the standardization process. For example, if one vendor is provided an opportunity to conduct an oral presentation, then all vendors must be provided that same opportunity. Now that we've discussed the organizational structure of the Purchasing Division, in addition to the various types of procurement methods, I'll briefly touch on other programs that are administered by the Purchasing Division. The first is the Travel Management Office. The Travel Management Office offers guidance through the state travel policy, which governs state employees who are conducting in-state, out-of-state, and international business travel with the state of West Virginia. This policy addresses such areas as transportation, lodging, meals, registration fees, other expenses, and forms of payment. Fixed assets. Agencies are responsible for certifying their inventory by July 15th of every year. The agency head must certify the date of the last physical inventory, that all items meeting entry requirements have been entered into the fixed asset system, and that all retired items were retired in accordance with surplus property policy, procedures, and guidelines. A physical inventory must be conducted once every 3 years. And the final program is surplus property. The West Virginia State Agency for Surplus Property is responsible for the disposition of commodities or expendable commodities no longer needed by the state, or more specifically, the owning state agency. Surplus property must approve all methods of disposition related to the commodities, regardless of the acquisition cost. This slide leaves you with a few helpful resources should you wish to learn more about the state purchasing process, including the procurement officer listing I mentioned earlier in this presentation, the Purchasing Division's website, the new Purchasing Division Procedures Handbook, which went into effect on April 11, 2019, the Vendor Procurement Guide, our intranet site, and our specification repository. Please keep in mind that we'll take a few minutes at the end of today's presentation to answer any questions you may have, so please continue to send those questions to the host. On behalf of the Purchasing Division, I appreciate your attention. We will now prepare the presentation slides for the purchasing card portion of today's training. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Once again, welcome back to our biannual training that we have with the Purchasing Division as well as State Auditor's Office. I'd like to introduce myself. I am Travis Mullinax, Training Administrator of the Purchasing Card Division. And on behalf of Auditor McCuskey and everyone employed at the Auditor's Office, we want to thank you for attending today's presentation. For the next probably about 45, 50 minutes, I will go over in detail information that hopefully you find interesting about the Purchasing Card Program. And then at the conclusion of my time, we will have probably about 15 or so minutes opened up for any questions that you might have. You can always submit your questions now via the chat, and we can gather those and assemble those so that at the conclusion we can promptly answer those. Again, those can be questions related directly to the Purchasing Division or to myself for purchasing card related questions. There's three specific things that we're going to be talking about here when it comes to the Purchasing Card Division. Give me 1 second here to kind of get moving. One second here, trying to get the slides to advance here. Pardon this technical difficulties, but I'll just keep on going. We're going to talk about three different areas here. It is called the card statistics and some utilization we're going to discuss. So we're going to make our way to general information, and then at the conclusion, we're going to talk about transparency. Now, when it comes to card statistics and utilization, if you're anything like myself, I kind of like to see numbers once in a while. I like to see how this is going and what is going on when it comes to the program itself, and just to know whether or not how we're doing as we measure the card statistics with previous months, previous years. So we'll discuss all that, and then we'll talk about the utilization of it. Utilization is really important because if we're just honest, are we utilizing the P card to its fullest potential? And it's imperative for every single state agency, every department out there to take the time to make sure that they're utilizing the P card at the fullest potential. And then again, general information and transparency. So as we discuss, as we're continuing to work around the concept of card statistics, we have approximately 8,000 P cards statewide. 8,000, which is a huge amount. Now, this is within the P card program itself, about 8,000 P cards on the state side. That's not including the local government side, which is a whole separate program in of itself. Of the 8,000 P cards statewide, we have about 188 master accounts. And some of our state agencies, they have multiple master accounts that they're in charge of. Sometimes we use the term managing accounts instead. But there's about 188 of them out there, and it is important, of course, for every single state agency to make sure they reconcile their master accounts every single month in a timely fashion. This also means we have 130 plus state agencies that are part of the P card program. And whether it's under administration, commerce, your miscellaneous boards and commissions, transportation, so forth, we have a whole bunch of different state agencies that are part of the program. When it comes to some of the nuts and bolts, we had almost 600,000 transactions that were processed on the P card in fiscal year 2018. 600,000. That is a tremendous amount of transactions, and we're certainly grateful for every single one of them because it ultimately helps the state save money. We'll explain that here in a second, but the average per transaction is about $683.82. Every penny counts. If that seems high to you, it's only because this is the average. So we consider the small dollar as well as large dollar type transactions in play, about $683 per transaction. That translates to $406 million in volume. Now, compared to the state budget, I think it's probably somewhere around a little bit under 10% potentially of the state's overall budget. But when it comes to comparing that number to other states around the country and how much of their budget they use the P card, we are number one. There's no other state in the country that uses the P card when it comes to the comparison of the total state budget and how much of it the P card is used. We have the highest. We use the P card most out of any other state agency, so we are number one in that category. As a result, though, we're able to fully maximize what we call savings. There is an intrinsic savings that takes place when we use the P card. And I will unpack that here by understanding that we saved the state about $37 million in cost avoidance. Now, this happens when we consider two things. One, your traditional procure-to-pay process has kind of this cost range between $50 to $200 when you consider the man hours it takes to process, again, your traditional procure-to-pay. So this is going to end up going into that warrant that's going to be released, that check that's going to be released, and all the different man hours as well as approvals and so forth, let alone the cost per check to, and many times for the state, we're actually processing a large number of check payments that for them just themselves are for low dollar items. And so this is a very costly and inefficient process, which you can understand is, very much problematic. So when we think about the changes here that can be made with the P card, it's really simple. When we switch to the P card, there is a savings, an efficiency savings that ranges, again, these are just some ranges per the NAPCP, the National Association of Purchasing Card Professionals. They kind of give us range about 55% to 80% savings when you switch to the P card. Now, if you want to know what that dollar looks like, if you actually put it into an actual dollar, then it's looking at $63 per transaction, roughly. $60 per transaction of savings for every single transaction that instead of going the traditional procure-to-pay process, you are going through the P card process, you're saving the state $63 per transaction. So if you go back to the original almost 600,000 transactions that were put on the P card last fiscal year, you multiply that by $63, there's your $37 million of savings just by using the P card. We were still going to do those 600,000 transactions, but if we would have pushed them through the traditional procure-to-pay process, that would have cost the state roughly $37 million more dollars. And in a time where we are all trying to save the state as much money as possible because we value our programs, we value our community, we value our state employees, we value the citizens of this great state, it makes sense then to try to maximize the use of the P card as much as possible. Last year, the auditor sent forth a press release. I apologize for the small print on this, but I would like to highlight this. It was released, again, about a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago, February 5th of last year. And in it, as you can see there on your screen here, Auditor McCuskey it has encouraged all vendors doing business with the state to go to the auditor's website and file to receive payment through either the state's EFT, the Electronic Funds Transfer Payment System, or to accept the state P card. In fact, as you continue to see there, March 31st of last year, all new vendors doing business with the state has to be signed up for one of these two, minimally. And the reason why is if you look at the very last paragraph, it's kind of an eye-opening paragraph. When I first saw this press release myself, I was amazed at this. It says here, it says currently the auditor states that his office, the auditor's office, prints and distributes approximately 20,000 checks to vendors per week. Now, of course, that number was at the time of the press release, and I do not know what that number is today. Currently, I would anticipate it's probably a lower amount, but still, that is an astonishing amount of checks that is being printed every single week. And so, naturally, Auditor McCuskey and his team trying to save the state money is the reason for this press release, for vendors to have to now doing business with the state has to sign up for EFT or the P card. And, of course, any vendor that when it comes time for their renewal time, at that point of their renewal, they would have to sign up for one of those two if they had not already complied. So we have to ask the question then, could we have saved more? When we think about the utilization of the program, could we have saved the state more money? And if you will, are we doing our part to ensure that we are saving the state as much money as possible? Because let's just be honest. The financial and institutional benefits of using the P card are inexorable. So to further kind of explain this, let's take a look at some of the general information of the P card program, getting kind of the nuts and bolts, if you will. We approximately have 7 different types of purchasing cards. And you can see there on your screen we have some lovely colors to clearly identify our P cards so that hopefully personal use is cut down. The most commonly used card is the state P card, if you will. That's our one card. It is not locked down at all to any merchant category codes. It is able to be used on behalf of the state agency. And probably the second most common card we have is called the travel card. The difference between these two is very simple. The travel card is locked down. It's locked down to travel-only merchant category codes. What this means is that the cardholder, the card is issued in their name. It is a travel card, so if they were going out and traveling on behalf of their state agency for business here, and they go to the gas station, they can use their card to purchase gas, to book hotels, to book airlines, car rentals, etc., to register for conferences. These are all travel-related MCC items, and the travel card can be used for that. They would not be able to go to Walmart, for example, and buy office supplies there or Office Max and go there or whatever the case may be. They couldn't go and buy non-travel related items. The Ghost card is no doubt familiar to most of you as well. The Ghost card is simply a travel card, except it is a Ghost card that is at the department level. So in other words, it is a department travel card. So if centralized booking is taking place, the state agency could utilize a Ghost card to book travel on behalf of state employees for their agency that are traveling on behalf of that agency. So most of our 130 or so state agencies have one of these two in play, meaning a travel card or Ghost cards in play. If you have any questions, of course, on those, any of those three, as those are the most common, you can always contact us. The emergency card is a option as well. Most of the time that is utilized by our Adjutant General's office or as well as any other agency that might have a situation where they need to utilize a card for state of emergency situations. So they would utilize the emergency card in that situation. In most circumstances, those limits are actually at $1 and are just sitting on in a kind of like a standby mode. And then once we have that state of emergency, then they can move forward. We can activate those to the fullest limits that they need, so they can go ahead and take care of the responsibilities for the state of emergency. We also have a managed spend card, which another way is saying is a declining balance card. And what that simply means, that's preloaded. It's preloaded with a certain dollar amount, and then as that card is being used, that dollar amount is declining or reduced. Most of our state higher ed, actually our higher ed institutions, if you will, the sports teams typically would utilize this type of card. It is not a widely used card, and but it is available for those circumstances that it is deemed necessary. The virtual P card, that is a newer program that we are really in the infancy stage of. The idea behind the virtual card is that a cardholder literally does not have a physical card in their possession. The vendor, you're wanting to transact with a vendor, that vendor sends you an invoice. And then what happens is, instead of calling up the vendor and giving them, or stopping by a point of sale again and giving them a physical card, what you do, there is a process to where the vendor receives a virtual card number from the bank. In this case, U.S. Bank is our bank. They get a virtual card number, and then they process the transaction utilizing that virtual number. Once the transaction has been completed by the vendor, once they've done what they needed to do, that card number disappears. And so the opportunity for fraud or misuse and abuse is significantly reduced completely, because that card number disappears. It is gone. And then there's reconciliation on the backside. Now, it's a lot more complex of a process behind the scenes, and less complex up front to the user, to the cardholder, him or herself. And the reason why is because of how this is designed. It's designed to minimize the risk of fraud and misuse and abuse. It's also designed to help with the reconciliation, to make the reconciliation process a little bit more smoothly. If you have questions about the virtual card program, again, we are on the infancy stage of this. We actually have one state agency right now that is piloting this program with us, and it's going very well. But we are in the process of, probably within the next calendar year, of being able to step out and asking other state agencies to join us as an additional pilot agency as we begin to unveil this virtual P-card program and try to make it just as successful as the current one. It would not replace the current purchasing card program. It would be in addition to it. The last card type we have is called the fleet card. It is an option that we have, but we do also have the fleet management division, or the agency of the fleet management. And certainly I have actually my next slide actually talks about the fact that last year, in July of last year, we have the red fuel cards by Fleet Management Division that were no longer in use. They were deactivated, if you will. They were turned off. In fact, those red cards, for those agencies that were utilizing the red cards, they would need to move over to the P card for the use of buying fuel for equipment or rental vehicles. Now, that's for the red card. When it comes to the blue fuel cards, though, this change did not impact that at all. So if you are still utilizing the blue fuel cards, you continue to do so. If you have any questions on that, you can certainly contact Fleet Management themselves, and they'd be happy to answer any questions you might have on that. Some of the basic understanding of the P card itself, of course, it is the preferred method of payment. We know that. Man, it is so efficient, and it's an effective process for the payment of all state expenditures. Why? Well, it's really a threefold process that we talk about. It decreases accounts payable expenses. It cuts down any program costs, and the reason why, again, that's talking about just simple man hours. It cuts down those man hours of processing stuff that the traditional procure-to-pay process has. It just reduces those costs. But man, the controls, the increased controls and the monitoring of payments, so is such a valid and valuable commodity to have as a result of the P-card program. Just think about it. The moment your cardholder swipes that card, you know exactly where they were, what vendor they used the card, what they bought, for how much. I mean, you know all of that right then and there. And so and all the tools of monitoring are there, whether it's in U.S. Bank's website directly or within the auditor's or Oasis system itself through BI or other different types of reports. You can absolutely monitor all of the payments through P-card right now, right when it happens. Naturally, for any program, we have to have some policies and procedures. Now, the state policies and procedures when it comes to the P-card program, that is the minimum standards. The minimum standards. You as the state agency are certainly more than welcome to make your policies a little bit more stringent, but you have to at least meet our minimum standards. And naturally, you need to develop and document any sort of internal control procedures of how you run your program internally, making sure that within those procedures there is proper oversight, there is compliance with all the governing entities and everything like you make sure that if I would look at your internal control procedures and I start reading through them, they are clear, they are concise, and they tell me exactly how you run your program. So that if an internal auditor would come in and take your internal control procedures and begin to test those and to do their evaluation, they would then be able to hopefully look at all this and say, this is great, this is complete, this is thorough, exactly what it is, you are doing exactly what you have stated here. So if it has been a while since you've taken the time to look at your internal control procedures, I would encourage you to take a moment and to pull those up and to double check and make sure that they are where they need to be. If they are not, please revise them and then submit them back to the P-card division really as soon as you possibly can. They are required to be to our office, so please make sure you take the time to visit your internal control procedures. So who is at the head of your program internally? Who is in charge of that program? Well, that is the agency head. The agency head is ultimately responsible for the program. Now, the agency head can serve as themselves or designate somebody to serve as the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer. This person is responsible for the oversight, the administration, all the monitoring, everything that goes on in the program. They just can't kind of wipe their hands off and say, hey, I delegated my responsibility. That's John Doe's job now. I have nothing in this. You can't do that. You actually, as obviously a person in that responsibility, of that role, you have earned that job, you've earned that role, and this is just part of those responsibilities of making sure that the P-card program internally is being run and operated as it should. But not just the CFO or the agency head should know this stuff, but every single coordinator and cardholder out there in your program needs to be knowledgeable of these policies and procedures. In fact, for the cardholders, they're not only having to take training, which coordinators do as well, but cardholders actually have to electronically accept a cardholder agreement form saying they have actually read the policies and procedures. They understand them. They acknowledge that. So we want to make sure that everybody in the program understands what the responsibilities are, what the P&P says and states the responsibilities are. So that also includes your department heads and your directors, your managers, and supervisors. Bottom line, if you are a person internally that is part of the P-card program circle, then you need to have proper training, whether that is solely at the cardholder level because that is all you do, or if you are in any sort of reviewer role, coordinator type, or manager or supervisor role, and you are reviewing transactions, you are approving transactions, that is, if you will, summed up as a coordinator. That's the type of training you have to have there. I might as well take a moment to say that in, I think it's August, I'm going to say I'm trying to remember the date, mid-August. I am losing the date on that. But we have our P-card, our P-card coordinator training is in August. You can go to the auditor's website if you are the primary coordinators or the co-coordinators, if you are a sub-coordinator, if you are a coordinator role, then we encourage you to register for our annual coordinator training that is in August. That's going to be held at Flatwoods. and I'm double checking that date real quick here. There's actually 2 dates that we are offering. You do not have to register for both dates. You'd actually register for one date. And you go to the auditor's website. There is a meetings option there on the auditor's homepage. You click on that. There's some drop-down options on that meetings homepage, and one of them is the required purchasing card coordinator conference, again, held at Flatwoods this year in August. So if you have not registered, it is actually August 13th or 14th. That's the dates, August 13th or 14th. So if you have not registered yet, or your primary coordinator at your agency has not registered yet, please make sure that they do so as soon as possible so that we can have a good head count moving forward, and we can capture that information. And I might as well just take a moment real quick. Is the purchasing, have you guys opened up registration for the purchasing conference?
Mid-July.
Mid-July. So in mid-July would be the opportunity for the annual purchasing conference. So keep your eyes open for that, and I'm sure you get some notifications come mid-July about the opportunity to register for the purchasing conference. Okay, let's continue on here. For any member of a spending unit staff finding instances of unlawful use or possible fraud, misappropriation, mismanagement of the P card, to report such discoveries to the CFO immediately. Unfortunately, some individuals, as we know if you look anywhere in the press, sometimes you'll read a situation where someone has been caught. They've tried, if you will, to lavish themselves by using the P card to pay for goods or services, for personal gain. They've tried to do that, and they've been caught. Again, that's the value of the P card program, is because we can catch any of these instances right away or soon thereafter, because it's all electronically captured. And so we have a tremendous team behind this. In fact, the team, if you can see there on your screen, and if internally there, the moment the CFO finds any instances of, again, fraud, misappropriation, mismanagement, et cetera, they need to actually report this to an email address. This is not new anymore, but it might be newer for anybody that may be joining us for the very first time today. P-Card Self-Report. P-Card Self-Report at wvsao.gov. That is the email address that you need to submit your claim, if you will, or report these instances to within 24 hours of your discovery. So please do not delay on that. This is real important. Any internal P-Card investigations do not supersede this requirement. Okay? They do not supersede it. So you need to make sure that you report any of these to the P-Card Self-Report at wvsao.gov. Any transaction, sometimes we get calls at the office saying, hey, Travis, can I buy this with my P-Card? Or we have this coming up. Are we allowed to buy this for such and such, or for this situation? For us, we do not. We do not have the authority to tell you what you can or cannot buy with the P-Card. We will always tell you that you need to call purchasing, you need to call the Ethics Commission, you need to check the powers that be. Make sure that you're following all purchasing rules, all the governing bodies, anything out there that you have to follow, you check with them first. And if they give their blessing, if they say it's okay, then by all means, you can use the P-Card as the payment mechanism. So it's pretty much as simple as that. But every single coordinator, of course, that is charged with making sure their program does well on this one, they need to hold a position of knowledge and experience of all the responsibilities delegated to them. And the CFO, sometimes they might have to actually put more people in that coordinator role than what they have right now or what they currently have. What's equally important, though, is not just have a primary, but there needs to be a backup coordinator. If you will, a co-coordinator or a finance coordinator, somebody else internally there that should the primary coordinator be gone, life happens, and they're not there, we have to have somebody else that we can reach out to get some answers. And maybe in some cases it might be at the end of the month when the bill is due, and we have to reach out to the agency and say, hey, we still have transactions out there that need to be reconciled, and this needs to be done right away. So please make sure that there's at least, obviously, a primary, but there's also that financial co-coordinator also in play internally. Naturally, no cardholder should be their own coordinator, without a written waiver from our office. We talked about the internal control procedures already need to be in place to make sure you're in compliance and make sure that you submit those in writing to our office right away. Let's talk about transition ourselves to reconciliation. Now, reconciliation is something that we always encourage people to do on a regular basis. Don't wait to have your cardholders reconcile their transactions at the end of the billing cycle. They can do it every single day. If they do a transaction today, the card swipe happens today, assuming the vendor passes that information to the bank, then the next day we'll receive a file from U.S. Bank saying, here's your transaction. And so truly, it can be as quick as the next day the cardholder can go into the system and reconcile their stuff. So the recommendation is always, and best practices will always tell you to reconcile every single day. I would say no worse than weekly. If your people can get their stuff reconciled on a weekly basis, I think that's a major win. If they can do it even, again, the next day, that is phenomenal. And that will really help you guys on the backside come the end of the cycle date to make sure that your bill is paid responsibly. Now, again, this is the cardholder. We say who is responsible to reconciling the transactions. Now, the cardholder has to review all the transactions and make sure it's for safe use. But depending on your agency, some of you have proxies out there that actually go into the system and reconcile within Oasis itself. It makes no difference to us. But know this, if it is a proxy that's going into the system, that proxy has to be a coordinator because that proxy is looking at other people's stuff. So that proxy has to be established at least as a coordinator. And when I say coordinator, that means that can be a sub-coordinator, a coordinator, just somebody that has taken coordinator training and therefore has been given the responsibility of this, okay? And that would be, again, reconcile all individual transactions by the scheduled payment date, which, by the way, the scheduled payment date for this current cycle was yesterday. So all of the transactions for this last billing cycle were due yesterday. So you need to make yourself a note. Double check with your primary coordinators and see if they got all of their transactions reconciled on time. Because if they did not get it done yesterday, then it's now late and we are behind and we have not paid on time. As we continue to talk about reconciliation, the next major level of understanding is supporting documentation. We also get asked that question, what exactly is supporting documentation? Well, in a nutshell, it's anything at all that if an internal auditor was taking a look at this group of supporting documentation, that this documentation would clearly give evidence of your receipt, we get evidence if there is any sort of internal procedure, so if there was something that gets signed off on or something like that. In other words, anything at all that says I had, this is all the documentation needed to give support of this transaction, it's there. We really encourage agencies to have a zero tolerance policy, and the idea on this is very simple. Every transaction should have attachments to it, every single one. So minimally, it's going to have its receipt based on Section 7 of the Policies and Procedures that talks about transaction reconciliation and documentation. If you have questions on it, go to Section 7 and read up on it, exactly what is required. Again, the most basic is a receipt, a thorough level 3 data receipt that gives all of the line item detail, vendor name, address, all that good stuff. That is the most minimum basic. But it also can entitle other things, like receiving reports that have signatures on it, or if there's any other internal things, policies and procedures in play that require signatures or other documentations, that also has to be part of the transaction supporting the documentation. P-card delegation, of course, is prohibited. Of course it is. We actually recently received notification of a delegation that was taking place, and that cardholder's card had been deactivated as a result. So you cannot, the cardholder, him or herself, cannot give their card or card number or anything about it to somebody else for them to use. You can't delegate that to somebody else. The most basic situation I can think of is, let's just say you have somebody in a position of authority, a boss, to which the card is in their name, and they give their card to their administrative assistant, who then, hey, could you go and buy, office supplies? And that card's not in his or her name. It's in the boss's name. Well, that's delegation, and you can't do that. So If there's a situation internally there where there's some delegation going on, that is prohibited, completely prohibited, and we would encourage that you just kind of maybe step back and think, well, maybe I need to give this person a card so that we stop this delegation. Let's just make sure all the people internally that need to have a card so they can do business on behalf of the state and their state agency. Fraud, misuse, and abuse, here's the code for you, just for your records. We've talked about it before. In fact, on the next slide, this is the P-card self-report slide. We talk about any self-reporting example. It's like gift cards without prior approval. That's right. Gift cards have to receive prior approval. You just cannot use the P-card and go willy-nilly, if you will, and go out there and buy gift cards or use the P-card to secure those. You have to have prior approval with our office, and that's the P-card division's prior approval. And there's some guidelines as to what we have to know about that. PayPal, other third-party processing vendors out there, we have to know about that as well. Now, there's two types of pre-approvals when it comes to third-party processors that you have the option of getting. One, it can be at an individual level. In other words, you can get one at a per transaction or per situation level. So in other words, I need to make a transaction with Amazon, and I recognize in my cart that all of a sudden, well, this is going to go to a third-party payment processor. I stop. I contact my primary coordinator, who then submits the pre-approval request to the P-card division. And this is a one-time request for Travis to make this purchase on Amazon. This is the reasons behind it. Here's all the details, and then the P-card division will give their blessing or not, depending on the situation. Now, that's a one-time situation. But at the agency level, you also have the choice of having a departmental, if you will, or blanket approval that you yourself will actually be in charge of monitoring all third-party situations. Now, the reason why this is important is because when you go through a third-party payment processor, you are losing your ability to dispute that transaction. U.S. Bank will support us in any dispute situation, but when you go through a third-party payment processor, they will not. It is up to the agency then to understand that at that moment for those third-party situations, you yourself are taking on the full brunt of the responsibility for those disputable situations should they occur. This is why you have to have the pre-approval in advance. But this is another example of a situation where self-reporting is mandatory. So again, the CFO would need to email us, or the P-card coordinator as well, but email the P-card self-report at odsao.gov should an instance occur when the pre-approval or the prior approval was not in play. Personal purchases is another one, and employee fraud. Those are very logical, and it needs to happen right away. Again, this has to happen within 24 hours. 24 hours of discovery, the CFO has to report any personal purchases or employee fraud situations, any gift cards without prior approval, any PayPal or third-party payment processor type situations without prior approval. That needs to be given to us within 24 hours to the P-card self-report email. Now, the group of individuals who are charged with the monitoring of this, and it is their day in and day out jobs, is the State Auditor's Office Public Integrity and Fraud Unit. These individuals, they are the ones in charge of the program oversight section. Steve Connolly is the general counsel, deputy state auditor, and director of this division, with Kelly Snyder as the fraud unit case manager. And those individuals, of course, are responsible for this new division that Auditor McCuskey developed upon his arrival. They've done a tremendous job, and they're doing a wonderful job. And these are the individuals that receive those P-card self-report requests, or not requests, excuse me, submissions when you email to that email address. I'd like to transition now to really a topic that is not new to all of us. It's kind of a hot topic and has been. It's called transparency. Transparency. Now, I want to ask you, what exactly is transparency? There's a couple of definitions that I have in place. One was from ballotpedia.org, and they simply talk about how it's this openness, this accountability, seeking out this honest government. In a free society, transparency, if you will, is government's obligation to share information with its citizens. And at the heart of it is how we hold citizens accountable. It's how the citizens hold the public officials accountable. This is really important. Now, the auditor, a state auditor, he has developed a website. He and his team has developed a website called wvcheckbook.gov, and it's defined there as West Virginia believes transparency leads to more effective and accountable government and a more informed and engaged community. wvcheckbook.gov. This website is an amazing website. If you have never gone there before, I would encourage you to take a time to go there and to look at all of the information that is available to you. In fact, let me give you a few screenshots here as to where you can find it. So if you go to the auditor's homepage, you can see there what most of you are familiar with, which is the My Apps box. But to the right of it, you see the transparency, the green transparency app. So you would click on that app, and that's going to take you to the transparency home page. Now, the transparency home page itself has a few different areas of information. We have an information about revenue. If you want to get some information about the state's revenue, the state's spending, there's some information potential of the Supreme Court and some other things on the right-hand side. Now, I'm not sure. I haven't been on there. The screenshot was taken at the time. Some of these screens or these pages might have changed. So I apologize if maybe some of the information has changed. It's not the most current screenshot. But to the credit of this website, they are constantly updating it with the most current information so that for the user that goes and accesses wvcheckbook.gov, they're going to get the most current information. Back in April of last year, Auditor McCuskey set forth another press release, and it talks about just the power of this website. And in fact, we actually got some national recognition from the U.S. Public Interest Research Group Education Fund and Frontier Group. And when they released their 8th report on government spending transparency, they actually ranked West Virginia with their highest rating, an A+ rating. And out of the 50 states, I mean, that's amazing. That is such a job well done. So we are certainly to be thankful for that. On the very last paragraph, it's saying, being recognized as the nation's most transparent state should bring not only pride, but also a great sense of satisfaction to our citizens, knowing that revenue and spending are now under public scrutiny. Auditor McCuskey continues to say, transparency allows books to be opened and elected officials to be held accountable. Such a powerful thing, this website. But to bring P-card into the idea of transparency, because that's what we're talking about here, so how does the P-card help transparency? How does it do that? Can it do that? Is it possible to actually, the using of the P-card, does it actually help us with transparency? Well, I've kind of already alluded to it already. The fact that the moment you utilize the card, the moment you swipe the card, that transaction and the details of it, we can see. It is transparent. But see, you have to understand, the more, therefore, we use the system, the more we can get out of it. Again, the more we use it, the more we get out of it. But really, since today's conversation is really about the purchasing division and about the P-card division, this is the procurement side and the payable side. So the transparency, and we're just kind of just walking this down the path, the reality is, I have to ask this question, how well do we communicate? Because if we want to be transparent, we have to communicate. We have to communicate internally and within the procurement division and within the payables division. They have to communicate well. In fact, how often does the procurement officer or division internally actually talk to the payables? Do you guys even talk to each other? Do you know who each other are? Let alone the cardholder, him or herself. It is really important that all of these entities in play sit down at the same table and make sure that the payable people, all the way down to the cardholder person who is going to be using potentially the P-card to release the encumbered funds that was obviously wrapped up in an award document, I need to know how that's going to go. And so it makes sense for those groups to get together for the sake of transparency so that we can truly capture all of the information, how it's flowing, it's really important that these groups come together. Because if we correctly reference a commodity-based award document to a transaction, then we are buying into being fully transparent when it comes to P-card and how we spend our money. Now, I'm going to go a little bit in the weeds here for just a brief moment and some screenshots. I just want to show you guys how you connect those dots, how correctly referencing a commodity-based award document to a transaction is the key. This may or may not look familiar to you. I have borrowed an old ACT from our friends at DHHR, and within a transaction, there is a commodity section. And as you can see here, this is the fields that you would reference. We reference the ACT, obviously the department 0511, and then the full document ID. And then this reference vendor line is always going to be 1 or a 0 because within these award documents, there's only one vendor. And then the reference commodity line. These are the fields you have to reference. And when you do that to the transaction, that is you connecting the dots of your procurement award document to the transaction. And if you do that, you are going to be in a great place of success, because what happens is, in combination to making sure that the quantity and the unit price values are accurate. In other words, is this transaction 100% of what's been encumbered? It's going to release 100% of it, or is it going to release a partial amount of it? You got to do a little bit of common sense and a little bit of math sometimes. But if you do this well, what's going to happen is that the accounting lines are going to pull over that you have identified in your award document. They are going to control the situation that makes sure that everything gets aligned properly. So when that happens, and then the payment document, the PRCC creates and goes final, ladies and gentlemen, that encumbered document now gets released. And so now your world of the procurement team and the payables team coming together through the use of the bridge of the P-card transaction, and we are fully being transparent. So now when it comes to reporting, when it comes to knowing exactly what you bought and why you bought it and how you connect, all of that gets wrapped up nicely, packaged well together when you do that. Now, this is a very high level, and really it's just 3 steps, and I'm just putting them here on your screen. There's just really 3 steps that a user would have to do to connect those dots. Now, our plan in the future here is to have some trainings that we'd be able to discuss how to do this very well. Some of you we've already visited. We've already been to your place. I know myself personally, I've come and we've talked about this very reality of how to connect the procurement world with the payables world, utilizing the P-card for that. So we are kind of I would say probably within the next 3 or so months, we're going to be releasing some information to where we will be holding training specifically for people to come and to attend these and to learn and to grow and to expand their program, because we want to utilize the P-card as much as possible, again, for the intrinsic cost savings that is there to be found. Again, as much savings that can be found helps the state as a whole, helps us save money. And so be knowledgeable of that now, be looking for that in the future, as we will be sending out some of that information about these trainings, to where we will, again, we'll be conducting these trainings for the sole purpose of connecting and showing how to connect an award document, a commodity-based award document, to a P-card transaction for the sake of releasing the encumbered funds. So in a nutshell, using the P-card to release encumbered funds does help an agency and the state become more transparent. At this time, we are going to take about a 60-second pause here and allow you the opportunity or longer to write any questions you might have in the WebEx there on your Q&A portion of your screen. If you have any questions, and this could be purchasing questions, these could be P-card questions. We are all assembled here in the room, and we are ready to answer. So we will just take a pause here to gather those questions, and when we formulate an answer, we will come back on here momentarily to answer those questions. Thank you.
All right, we've had one question. This is James Meadows, General Counsel for the Purchasing Division. The question is, how do you define a West Virginia company when the statistics are provided regarding a West Virginia company purchase? And I think that reference is probably to the annual report. And So to answer that, since Oasis was implemented, the purchasing division has utilized the systems reporting capabilities to identify West Virginia vendors for purposes of that annual report. Now, there is a slight hiccup with that. It's our understanding that the report includes all vendors that are registered in Oasis with a West Virginia address, regardless of their incorporation location within that definition of a West Virginia company. We adopted that approach because it was the only practical way that we could get that information from Oasis and report that. Now, that being said, we realize there are some complexities there within, the definition of West Virginia vendors and companies, and those are really only going to be resolved if, Oasis begins to allow the collection of additional corporate, legal, business entity information. At the present time, all we really collect through the system is the tax status of that business entity and whatever address, that business entity chooses to give us. We don't go into depth about a corporation's incorporation state or incorporation address or things like that. And it would also be really helpful in that regard if the system were to fully integrate with the Secretary of State's business entity database, which does collect that information. And it's our understanding that, perhaps the lack of full integration there stems from, differences in data collection policies between those two offices that, hopefully we'll be able to resolve in the not too distant future. Another problem, that kind of stems from that lack of full integration that a full integration would solve is that, currently your procurement officers are required to manually check the Secretary of State's business entity database and do a name search. And the reason for that is that, the Oasis system, it will, how to say this, it will not report a vendor who is not in the Secretary of State's database but should be. That doesn't get flagged as an error. What the system will do is report to you a vendor that has previously filed in the Secretary of State's office but then failed in some regard, after that. So, for example, they didn't file their annual report, they didn't pay their annual fee to the Secretary of State's office, or they've been, administratively or otherwise dissolved. That will show up as an error, but a vendor that should be in there and isn't will not. So, we're really hopeful in the future that a full integration of that information would help to provide us with a better definition of what, a West Virginia company would traditionally be thought of. But, given the limitations we have right now, essentially we use a procurement report and sort it to arrive at West Virginia vendors based on the address that they give us in the system.
Okay, this is Travis. We have another question out there just talking about one from DOT, highways in particular. For the situation when it comes to transactions as they are obviously take place and they're loaded into our system, every single transaction out there, if there is an award document in play, the P card can be used to release those encumbrances. It is impossible, for example, for a user just to go to, the table is called the PRCUU table. We cannot just go straight to that table and manually enter in an arbitrary transaction and then connect the dots. But assuming there is a transaction that has been taken place, we've received it from U.S. Bank, therefore it's on that table, therefore needing to be reconciled. If there is a commodity-based award document out there that we need to connect those dots, then yeah, you can connect those dots and release the encumbrance utilizing that transaction. At this moment, we're still kind of scrolling through and making sure we haven't missed any questions. There have not been many today, but we'll just take a brief 60 seconds longer here to see if there's any other questions that would like to be submitted before we adjourn for the day.
All right, this is Jimmy Meadows again with Purchasing Division. The question is, how often are vendors on state contract reviewed to see that organizations are being served correctly in purchasing equipment, gear, furniture, et cetera, from said vendor? As state agencies, we are required to buy office furniture from correctional industries who routinely charge almost double for things that can be found for half the price at, say, Staples. So I guess, in discussing that, I would say that in terms of vendor review, the purchasing division regularly monitors that. We have an inspection program where we also monitor the agencies. In terms of the correctional industry program, that's not a traditional vendor. That is a program that was established by the legislature for mandatory use, and about the only thing that the purchasing division has to do with that program is we remind your procurement folks that you have to use it because the legislature has mandated it. So, in terms of pricing and issues like that correctional industries may, have, I would recommend that you communicate directly with them and let them know about any potential, price disparities that you see or ways that they can better serve you as their customer, because purchasing doesn't, we're not involved in that program at all, again, other than to remind your folks that the legislature said you have to use it, therefore you have to use it.
Well, are there any other questions out there? We're going to wrap this up. If we don't receive any more, we know your time is as valuable as ours, and we certainly appreciate the 2 hours you have dedicated to us this morning. I would like to take a moment just to state that for anybody that happens to be sharing a computer today, in other words, John has logged in, but Sally is there sitting beside him, and but yet we don't know about Sally. But she was there for the whole time, and she can also receive credit for this. You would need to go to the purchasing division's website. You need to complete the certificate process there to receive credit. So even though you did not log in to receive it automatically, you still have the opportunity to do so today. So again, that's for anybody that was just kind of in a passenger seat position on today's training. Are there any more questions? More questions? That's it? All right. Well, then on behalf of the Purchasing Division and the State Auditor's Office PCAR Division, it is a joy to have you guys with us this morning. Thank you so much for taking a bit of your time, and certainly have a blessed day. Enjoy yourself this week, and we will, I guess, see you in about a year's time. So take care, everyone. Bye-bye.